Hi, Chris. Thank you for joining me for Lead Time Chats.
Hi, Gene. Happy to be here.
So the topic we're going to talk about today is what makes engineering managers and tech leads most effective. And so, Chris, you've been in many senior engineering leadership roles now, from senior engineering manager at Uber to senior director at Zillow, and now you're the CTO at Lessen. I'm curious, when you personally made that transition into engineering leadership, what important skills did you find most challenging to develop?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's kind of a variety of things I think as people transition through that passage from IC to leader that come up. Uh, I think one of those is really about shifting your perspective from being focused on the output and the specific work and delivering results to more of a people focused role,
Mm-hmm.
obviously. So when you go through that transition, I think one way to think about it is there's a sort of a multiplier effect that you're able to create as a people leader, where as an IC, one hour of work equals 1 hour of output. But as a leader, 1 hour of work in a coaching or guidance or kind of career advice style environment can equal hundreds of hours of productive work. And I think shifting that perspective is important so that your priorities become more focused around the growth and opportunities of your people versus your own internal expectations or growth needs.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot more. I think as you go to engineering leadership roles, I think it's really important to keep the business context in mind and to not lose sight of why the company exists and the customers you're serving and what the macro drivers are for your business. I think having a deep understanding of how the business makes money and how you're serving your customers is really important because it helps you make sometimes little micro prioritization decisions that you don't want to always have to loop in your product manager or your leader to figure out. You should have enough context to make those at your level.
Yeah, and I think some of the skill sets that you mentioned, the coaching and the people multiplier aspects, those can be especially difficult for new engineering managers because it's so different from what they're used to doing, which is the IC engineering work. And so I found that a lot of newer engineering managers like to kind of hold on to that work and resist the shift over.
Yeah, yeah, and it's especially challenging when typically are a skilled IC and you can solve a
Mhm.
problem yourself very quickly, and spending the extra time to coach somebody or to help somebody along or let them maybe do it in a way that would be different from how you would approach it is the other thing to get comfortable with.
Yeah.
Right, letting somebody fail potentially because they did something a totally different way, or sometimes it's just you can learn from people too. You can learn that there are multiple ways to approach a problem, and you have to get comfortable with that. Losing some of that control, I guess, is really
Exactly. Yeah, I've definitely seen that with some engineering leaders where they kind of grow into their engineering leadership in this very chaotic, like thrown in the deep end type of environment. And then when they are thinking about growing engineering leaders, they put in so much scaffolding and so many guardrails to have them create this like very structured path, but it kind of defeats the purpose, right? People kind of need to make those mistakes for themselves.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's especially true as you're talking about coaching folks to become leaders themselves. So you start to talk about managing other managers and having folks that are making that transition from IC to manager as a manager. There are also techniques that maybe you've developed or approaches that you've gotten accustomed to as a leader that maybe have worked for you, but may not suit somebody else's style, may not suit their approach. So I think there's good guardrails and good principles to set, and there are some universal approaches that I think work pretty well in those scenarios. But sometimes it can be anecdotal. It can be specific to the team that you have, or the product you're trying to ship, or the
Yeah.
customer you're trying to serve. So it's good to allow some freedom, some autonomy and accountability is how I like to think
Mhm.
about.
So after,
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm curious, after moving to more, you were an engineering manager, and then as you've been moving into more and more senior leadership roles, how has your view on what makes engineering leaders effective shifted or changed?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's a couple areas. You know, some universal things haven't changed. I mean, the ability to be a strong owner and you know be a clear, concise communicator, I think, are paramount in leadership position. I think you know as I've evolved to more senior levels, I think you know it's similar, but a little different in the sense that people who can take a given goal or a given objective or an OKR and be able to holistically run with that, I think is the type of leader that I typically look for and want to hire and want to have on my team. So my view on that hasn't changed drastically. I think it's just the level of delegation that is required and the level of autonomy that I need to provide is higher, right? I just don't have the cycles to get into the weeds and understand some of the complexity of some of the things that we're building and working on. I'd love to. I love diving into the weeds and getting deep. And occasionally on nights and weekends, I'll go research something and figure things out on my own. But I have to trust the people that are in the positions that I've hired them into or promoted them into. So you know, I don't think it's changed a ton. I think ownership, communication, delivering results, and more than anything, just being a good supporter and advocate of your people, I think is the primary thing that you need to do as a leader.
Mm-hmm. More broadly, I guess, especially since you've been in these senior leadership roles, I'm sure you've managed a lot of managers and tech leads. What are the types of behaviors and actions that you see the most effective engineering leaders and engineering leaders doing? Maybe the things that you wish more engineering leaders would do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's again, I think it's reasoning about some of the business value and the trade-offs. I think there's a tendency sometimes for shiny object syndrome, especially if people start to get into leadership roles. They have that tech debt project they really want to work on, or they have that new technology they want to go pursue, or you know, a new framework, a new language they think is interesting. And you know, there's some merit to that. And of course, techno curiosity and excitement towards those disciplines is reason why they're engineers in the first place, and that's a good
Right.
to embrace. However, I think balancing that against the needs of the business and being able to make you know good, well-reasoned decisions with some sense of urgency and some sense of where the business is headed and the goals that we're trying to reach from a customer or supplier perspective, you know, business are important to keep in mind. And I think that's what I sometimes wish some of the engineering leaders would keep in mind a little more as they're working through their career. Not everybody. I mean, it depends on the person and the individual. Some people have a great
Yeah.
balance, and a great blend, and are really able to reason about various inputs into what should drive prioritization decisions. But other folks need a little guidance and coaching there, and tend to lean a little heavier towards the tech side because that's where they came from, and understandably are focused. But I think finding that balance is really important, and knowing how to prioritize within that is key.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like the judgment and sort of the ability to think critically about trade-offs, what's actually impactful for the business versus just technically interesting, those
That's
sorts of things.
right.
Yeah.
Judgment's a great word to use there. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
developing judgment. I think is the thing that you develop over time that doesn't come for free or isn't.
Yeah.
It takes some time.
And I imagine it builds in your relationship with engineering leaders over time as well, right? Like if someone comes to you and is like, hey, I think we should take on this project. Here are the reasons why. And they show that they have a really savvy understanding of business needs and opportunity cost, then they may have to do a little bit less next time of sort of making their case.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm. Are there any, well, actually, I guess a lot of times what I find is that newer engineering managers are pretty focused internally on their team. So they're thinking about, how do I help this team work effectively together? How do I, run one-on-ones? How do I support and coach people? Um, that's one part of being an engineering leader. The other part is sort of managing another part, not the other part, but another part of it is managing across an organization and also up. Um, in terms of managing up and out, what do you find is most important?
Yeah, I mean that skill set in and of itself definitely takes some time to develop, and you hit the nail on the head that often it is the case that folks are very focused on their team. This is my world and my service, or
Mhm.
my product, and having a more holistic view across the business and understanding the dependencies that are part of your team structure are super important. I think, especially as you get to scale in large organizations, like that really becomes really the limiting factor to a lot of growth and innovation. I believe is that there are such complexities and dependencies between teams, between organizations that have different goals and have different approaches or different leaders that they're taking direction from. So I think a common set of OKRs or unifying goals, I think, helps there a lot. And focusing on that as an engineering leader, I think, is important because it helps as you work across team boundaries or organization boundaries to leverage that framework to say, this is a goal that we're all working towards, or this is a goal that my team's working towards, maybe a goal your team's working towards. And that can help with some of those prioritization decisions and making sure folks are aligned. I think the other thing is just having the relationships to begin with, and spending some real time there, getting to know your peers and other team leaders and what they're working on and what their priorities are and what their strengths and weaknesses are in terms of their team capabilities is important as well, because you'll need to leverage those relationships as you deal with more and more complex software projects that cross multiple teams. And the more senior you get, typically the more complex the projects get in general. And it is, almost rare that you're going to do something that's completely defined in the boundaries of the team that reports directly to you. So you're almost always going to have to rely on some of your peers and other folks across the company to help you achieve your goals. So you got to have good relationships, and I think you got to be aligned on what the goals are as a team and as a company.
Yeah, and those aren't necessarily skills that a new engineering manager would have coming from being, a skilled IC. When you're in the position to coach people who are maybe not as aware of how important that relationship building is or is struggling, um, what are some ways that you found to be effective in coaching those leaders to think critically about their relationships within the organization?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's first and foremost just understanding that there's value to spending that time. Right? I think that can be the
Mhm.
first
That's
real
work too.
yeah, it takes real time out of
Yeah.
your day to go have coffee with somebody or schedule a one-on-one that you don't have a specific agenda or a specific topic that you need to walk through. So just, getting on the same page that there is value in creating those connections and knowing that you're sort of investing in the future, you're paying forward in some ways when there is a more acute need. So I think just grounding on that is the first point, but then um, you want to contextualize it, right? I mean, you don't want to just randomly start talking to everybody in the company for no reason, but contextualize around the borders of your team and of your areas, even if there's not an immediate need or immediate reason to have a chat or have a meeting with somebody. I think is important. And then of course, I think as we start to slowly return to offices here and there, I think that there is a social aspect that does play a part as well. So even in remote team scenarios, getting together every so often, whether it's quarterly or half annual, what have you, for a dinner or for a happy hour, I think does build some of those relationships. And sometimes the conversations that are had in those contexts are almost more valuable than the one you may have had at the office a few hours ago, because
Yeah.
people let their guard down a little bit sometimes and build a little bit of trust with one another, and that's important. You need to be able to trust your peers and coworkers that you're trying to work with.
Yeah, it reminds me of another engineering leader I spoke to, and he mentioned that years ago when he was working in the office, he would bring his dog and he would walk his dog around the office. And by the time that he would need something from marketing or sales, everyone had all these positive sentiment around him because he was the guy who brought the dog and they pet the dog. And so even something as silly as that is, it all adds up.
Yeah, I mean we're tribal in nature
Yeah.
in general, right? And we want to work and be part of a community and be part of a group. So I think naturally, introverted, extroverted, regardless, there's a human need there to work with other people. So yeah, setting those foundations, getting good relationships together early in your career, I think support, especially when you either step into a leadership role or when you join a new company. I think you kind of over-index on that and building some of those relationships early on.
Yeah. I think you mentioned sort of the return to office, and I think with with the transition to hybrid teams or like partially remote, partially in office teams, the social aspect and the relationship building is going to be really important. And perhaps the opportunities are not going to be spread as evenly across people who are in the office with certain people versus
Yeah.
working remotely. I'm curious in the past year if you found any effective ways to build those relationships and to work on those cross team relationships while you're not working in the same office. You can't go grab a coffee together.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the only real approach that I've found to be effective is you just have to be more deliberate about it. You have to explicitly schedule time on people's calendars, and I've also found we do like a weekly recurring coffee chat. That's Monday mornings just to get people together. The one rule we have is no shop talk, right? It's weekend and kind of casual, get to know each other conversations, which I think is good and healthy. We're using a couple other communication tools I think are interesting as well. One of which is Discord, which is like a voice first communication tool, and that's been interesting because it sort of emulates the office environment. You can just kind of leave it on in the background and go about your day and go about your work, and still chat with a coworker when you need to without having to schedule a meeting.
Nice.
The other thing I feel myself doing a lot more as well, especially moving into more senior leadership positions, is talking on the phone, going back to just good old calling somebody and not dealing with the video and being at your desk. And obviously it allows you to be mobile or run an errand or what have you and still have a conversation. And that's another way I feel like too, because there's just a certain innate casual element to the phone conversation.
Yeah.
I feel like at times that has become a little bit of a lost art, and we've moved everything to video and in person. So in business anyway. So I found that to be another technique, is just calling people and
Phone calls. Yeah.
yeah.
I found that to be really nice too. I mean, there's something very obviously we're recording a video conversation right now, but there's something very unnatural about having to stay put in a fixed place.
Right.
You wouldn't even have that in a meeting room, right? Like
True.
you would be able to face each other, it'd be a bit more relaxed. So I think that is definitely a contributor to Zoom fatigue. And I do have a lot of my one-on-ones where I'm like, hold on, let me get my mask. And then I go for a walk around the neighborhood, and I can hear people leashing up their dogs and also going for a walk. And it's been really nice.
Yeah, absolutely. Just getting outside and doing some of those walking one-on-ones, but via phone is a nice approach as well. So yeah, we're adapting, I think.
Yeah.
It's going to be an interesting world. We're going to move into a hybrid environment in the near future here. We'll have folks come in a couple of days a week and spend the rest of the time remote or optional in the office. But we have remote teams. We have teams all over the country. We have teams in Arizona, Chicago. We're building teams in other places as well. And having the right level of collaboration for folks that are here in like kind of the tech HQ versus folks that are in our corporate HQ in Arizona versus folks that are in Chicago or LA. We have a couple engineers down there. It creates this new need to always have the video conferencing be part of basically any meeting, any stand up, any check-in meeting, what have you. So, we've looked to I'm going to add a couple monitors that are on stands, that allow for sort of the robotic oriented sort of video chat that we can wheel around to different meetings and different discussions. So I think that'll be good. We'll see. And then I think it's just making sure that we have enough sort of on the calendar social activities where we can get together and have some of those more casual chats on a scheduled basis to make sure we're right across the offices.
Yeah, I think one thing you mentioned was the deliberateness. I think that's really important, of like being deliberate about scheduling time with people, making sure that people who are remote have roughly similar amounts of opportunity to socialize and connect with people who are in the office. Are there any other skills or things that you imagine engineering leaders leading in this hybrid world are going to need that maybe they didn't need as much before?
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of the just sort of understanding what your team's working on and understanding productivity, and some of that can get lost a little bit without having the ability to have just the casual question, face-to-face chat, when you're curious about something, or you get going on a topic for a minute. It's like, oh, let's just jump in a
Yeah.
office and whiteboard something, jump in a conversation, whiteboard something. So those are the things I think are interesting. Now we've created some interesting, but started to use a lot more tools to support that. Miro specifically for a lot of like whiteboarding style sessions. That's been helpful. So yeah, I think for engineering leaders, it's coming up with the right approach and system that doesn't feel micromanaging, tops down. We're tracking every hour and everything that you're doing, but also isn't completely freewheeling. Just we don't know what that person does, and occasionally checking code. There needs to be a happy medium where of understanding what your team's working on, making sure they have good, empowering, exciting things that they're working on that's helping grow their career that they're engaged with, and doing that in a way that keeps them engaged. I think is really the key point, right? Because in person it's a little easier to determine when somebody's a little disengaged or unhappy or what have you. When you're in a remote world, it's much harder.
Yeah.
No.
You get a lot of information in the office that you don't have to be deliberate about, right? So you see if someone's coming in 2 hours later than usual for weeks at a time, or if they just look really low energy. You can also get just information on what teams are working on, right? Like the ability to do something at a whiteboard, but also just seeing people at a whiteboard and getting a sense of, oh, that's how they're going to build out that feature.
Right.
That's one way that I've really liked the idea of working at Range this past year, of like Range being that tool that fills in that like ambient context you would get in an office, and making that context more equitably distributed to everyone. I think it'll be using Range or some tool like that makes it more intentional and deliberate will be really important for any hybrid teams.
Yeah, completely agree. You've got to come up with some additional tools and approach. You've got to standardize some of that too as a company. Right? It's got to be a little bit of agreement. Like we're going to use this tool for these purposes, and make sure that folks are doing that, because it is very easy to slip into just working with the people that you're physically sitting near, and forgetting that you've got teammates other places.
Especially when people return to the office and they're kind of getting their social and casual needs met in the office, right? Whereas right now, no one's getting those needs met at work, except through Zoom or phone calls. So in some ways, it's a little bit easier. Yeah.
It's going to be interesting in another year.
Yeah. Sure. I think it'll be an interesting next few years for sure.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, to end on a more tactical note, for newish engineering managers or emerging tech leads or people who are really just getting into engineering leadership, what advice do you have for them around being impactful and spending their time well?
Yeah. Get to know your team, get to know your team's context, and understand deeply how your team is contributing to the greater value of the company, of the mission, of the customers that you're serving. I think thinking holistically about the company first, team second, self last, I think is a good just general hierarchy to get your mind into as you start to lead teams. And keep the environment and the structure and the process that you developed lightweight and set up in a way that gets people excited to come into work every day. I think don't go too deep off I'm a manager now, I need to create structure process for everything that we're going to do as a team. And I've seen people do that where you end up over processing teams and over thinking about how they're supposed to work together, and you miss some of just the natural evolution of you'll get there as the team evolves and as you continue to take
absolutely. Yeah, especially as we approach this sort of transitional period, I think it's really important that the process can evolve and iterate and be nimble, rather than like this is the process. There's no Goldilocks process for engineering teams, unfortunately.
Great.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Chris. I think this will be really useful for newer engineering managers and engineering managers who have a bit more experience as well.
Right on. Yeah. Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun. fun. Thanks.